Hi everybody, my name is Johan, and recently I purchased this camera here, the Canon R5 MKII. I've used it for the last few months on safari, photographing mainly wildlife but also a bit of sport. And in this episode I'm going to give you my little review on this camera and what I like about it, and maybe some aspects of the camera that I don't like. So without wasting too much time, here is my review of the Canon R5 MKII. Hey everybody, okay, so like I mentioned, I recently purchased this camera over here. It's Canon's Canon R5 MKII. And just to give you a bit of background, I'm not going to sort of try and convince you to buy a certain brand of cameras. I think there's so many good cameras out there at the moment. In fact, I don't think there are many bad mirrorless cameras. But over the last few years, as you might know, I run photographic safaris. I'm a tour and expedition leader for Wildeye. And for the last sort of 3 or 4 years, I've been using the top-end DSLRs, so mainly Canon's 1DX Mark II and the R5. Canon 5D Mark IV. Sorry, that's the one. It gets so confused with all the different cameras out there at the moment. And sort of over the last sort of couple of years, I have been sort of toying with the idea of, getting a mirrorless camera, but I was in kind of two minds of what to go for, because Sony, they sort of sprung ahead of a lot of the other brands when it came out. So I was looking at the Canon, at the Sony A9. I was also then looking at, Nikon came out with some great cameras, the Z9, and then Canon's original R5. I don't know for whatever reason what it might be. Look, it's still an amazing camera, but it just wasn't exactly what I wanted at that stage. There were a few things that I felt that was missing that some of the other camera brands had. But when this particular camera came out, for me on paper, it ticked all the boxes that I was looking for. And with a lot of the new features that has been introduced in the Canon R5 MKII, which we'll touch on a little bit later, it, for me, was everything that I wanted. So let's talk about, firstly, just the look and feel of the camera. As you can see, I've got the battery pack on there. And Canon actually have brought out quite a number of different battery packs that you can have with the R5 MKII. So the one that I have now also includes the buttons for portrait shooting. You get one with a built-in fan, but then it doesn't have the buttons to shoot in portrait orientation. And then you also have the battery grip with the portrait orientation buttons and an Ethernet connection. So like I mentioned, for me, I wanted one. I love, just being able to switch over, and if I shoot in portrait orientation, all my buttons are there like they would be on the top of the camera. So for me, like the built-in fan wasn't too much of a concern. There is actually vents. If you look at without the battery pack on the camera, there are vents underneath to help cool the camera down. But this is exactly what I wanted from a battery pack point of view, because you first of all, you get more life in your battery, but like I mentioned also, being able to shoot in portrait orientation just makes it so much easier instead of having your hand all the way around. A few features that is a little bit different to the original R5. You'll see the on-off switch is now on the right-hand side and not on the left. And I find that quite useful, just because it's close to your shutter button. So that is very handy. And then also on the left-hand side of the screen, you've actually now got dedicated photo and video modes, which I find incredible. That's super helpful and very easy to use. Also, I think one of the things that's also quite a lot different is the new viewfinder. That's quite a lot bigger than the R5 MKII. The original R5. And one of the reasons for that is the built-in Autofocus control, which we'll touch on a little bit later. But from a look and feel point of view, especially with the battery grip, it feels like similar to your R3s. Might feel a little bit sort of bulkier. And, maybe for the ladies that, want a smaller camera, then don't have the battery grip in there. But I think for the men with the slightly bigger hands, this comes in very, very handy. All right, now the second thing that I really sort of looked for in a camera, and why I chose the R5 Mark II, is the megapixels. So boasting a 45 megapixel full frame stacked sensor. I love the high resolution cameras. I think they're incredible, and especially if you're looking to blow up big prints, and also your cropping capability is really, really good. I must say, sort of on the downside of that, I'm still finding the R5 Mark II to be a little bit more noisy than what I initially expected. Look, in all honesty, I'm quite comfortable shooting 6400 and even 8000 ISO with the camera, especially with the software that you have now. So it's not a deal breaker for me by any means. It's with the software, something like Topaz, you can get rid of that noise quite easily. Okay, then the third thing for me that I was looking for in the camera, especially shooting wildlife quite a lot, is the frame rate. So in electronic shutter, you can go up to 30 frames a second, which I think is a bit of an overkill, but always a nice to have. And then up to 12 frames a second in mechanical shutter. Now, 30 frames a second, personally, I don't use that frame rate. I mean, that's basically shooting video. So, and I can think of very few instances where 30 frames a second is really necessary. What I love about this camera is you can actually adjust your frame rate. So your high plus, you can bring it down from 30 frames down to 20 frames, as well as your high and your low settings. So I normally have this around about 15 frames a second for my high speed, and then sort of down to like 8 frames a second for the low speed, which I find that's more than enough. If you think back maybe sort of 7, 8, 9 years ago, the top of the range DSLRs were doing 11 frames a second. And, I think if you're going 30 frames a second, it's just a lot more work, a lot more editing that goes behind it. And I personally haven't found that I've missed a shot, going at 15 frames a second. So from that point of view, this camera gives me everything that I need from a frame rate point of view. And like I mentioned, I love the fact that you can go into the menu system and adjust your frame rate per setting, which it's super helpful. Okay, another thing that I was really interested in the R5 Mark II is the autofocusing system. So coming now with the new sort of artificial intelligence that you get in these mirrorless cameras, I heard a lot of good reviews about the autofocusing system, but it was only until I sort of tested it out in the field that I realized how good it really was. I think it is better than the R5, especially sort of in low light conditions. I just found it to focus a lot better, but it still has a few flaws, I found, especially in animals where the eyes are not as obvious or as bright as in sort of other instances. So I found like animals like tigers, especially in low light when you don't see the eyes clearly, that it often does struggle to pick up the eye. It will still focus on the body and on the face, but it doesn't lock onto the eye as much. And also with African wild dogs and with cheetah. Having said that, I do find that a lot of the cameras out there do struggle with some of these species. So it's not just a Canon issue. I do find it often to be a problem with people in the field having the same issue, not being able to lock on the eye. And I think that's important to when you set up your camera. So I use the normal back AF on button at the back that'll be for my eye tracking, my eye focus. But then I've also select the button next to it. That's your normal single focal point. So then you'll move your focal point around onto your subject and just focus that way if it doesn't pick up the eye. So again, not a sort of a deal breaker by any means, but I do find like the autofocusing system incredible. The nice thing is also if you're photographing sport, if you have kids that play sport, it actually has eye detection or face recognition. So you can take a photo of your child if they go and play, whether it be soccer or field hockey or whatever it might be. You can register their face and it actually will then focus on them through action scenes, which I think is quite phenomenal. I haven't used that a lot. I still want to try that out when my kids have a sports game on. But it's a nice feature to have, if sports photography is your thing. Another thing that is that really sort of took my attention or got my interest going was the introduction of pre-capture in the R5 MKII, which obviously the R5 doesn't have. So what this does is, if you've activated pre-capture on your camera, you focus, you half press your shutter, the files will start recording, and then as you press the shutter button, it will record those sort of 15 shots before the time. So think of a bird sitting on a branch about to take off. You half press your shutter, and then the bird takes off, and you might be a second or two late pressing the shutter button. Without pre-capture, you would have missed that takeoff moment. But now, with those files being recorded beforehand, you actually nail the entire sequence. It actually feels like cheating when you're photographing birds, to be honest. But it's a fantastic feature and one that I really love. The one downside is that Canon hasn't been, you're not able to assign a particular button for the pre-capture. And hopefully down the line that gets fixed. What I do is I've set up my menu button right up at the front here. I press that, it goes straight into my menu. And then I've got pre-capture right up at the top there. I can activate it on or off. I think apart from birds, I haven't really used pre-capture all that often. I could see maybe where it comes in handy from a sports photography point of view, but just bear in mind that it does take a lot more images, and it also will go through your battery life quite a bit. Then the last feature that I really like, and I've used it quite a bit, especially in Norway for the orcas, is the Autofocus control. Now, the Autofocus control, again, you can assign any button to activate it. And what it does is, as you look through the viewfinder, wherever you look, your focal point will go there. You can lock focus and then photograph. And the reason I used it in Norway for the orcas is because the orcas are obviously underwater and then surfacing, you don't always know where they're going to be. And I did find the Autofocus control, the normal AF, did struggle to pick up on the eyes, obviously. So by me just looking through the viewfinder to a particular place, I can lock focus and capture images that way. Now, bear in mind that in order for the Autofocus to work, you do need to calibrate it numerous times. And I would always recommend to people, do it in different lighting conditions. So do it in bright light, in low light, and eventually it will start sort of learning where your eye is looking and photograph it from there. I found for like general wildlife, it becomes a bit sort of distracting because if you're photographing a lion in front, for example, and you're looking at a lion that's maybe behind it, your focus point will obviously jump across. So it's not a absolute must-have for me, but I did find it quite useful in Norway. It's a very clever tool. I know they've got it in the R3 as well. So yeah, it's a nice, handy part to have in the camera. Okay, and then from a video point of view, it's obviously got everything that you can imagine. It's being able to shoot up to 8K. I haven't used the 8K personally. I found like the 4K, 60 and 120 frames a second is kind of the area that I use. And what I love about it as well is when you're in the video mode, you can set 3 modes to use. So you can dial through all 3 your different modes. I've set my mode 1 being slow-mo videos, mode 2 4K 60 frames a second, and then mode 3 4K 120 frames a second. That's just kind of what I've used. So in a scene, you can quickly dial through the different settings or the different modes, and yeah, it works super well. The stabilizing the camera is phenomenal. I do think it's better than the R5, and the focusing is also really, really good on this. I find, especially using the back screen for videos, it helps getting sort of low angles and stuff. But that's the screen itself is not much different than the original R5. I do find, like I said, I think the key difference from a video point of view is the stabilization, and the focusing has also been improved slightly. Okay, so the question will then come is, if you have an R5, should you upgrade to the R5 Mark II? And it's a tough question. It really is. I've kind of been speaking to some of my guests about it and kind of thought about it myself. If you're photographing wildlife and sport, and especially a lot of action scenes, then I would recommend switching over to the R5 Mark II. Especially if you're a bird photographer, I think with the introduction of pre-capture and also the improved auto-focusing system really, really is impressive. I think from an image quality point of view, I don't think there's much of a difference that I could see between the R5 and the R5 Mark II. But I think with the introduction of, like I said, of pre-capture, the stabilization of videos, and the better autofocusing system, I would definitely say the R5 Mark II is worth the upgrade. Looking at kind of what's out there on the market, again, budget is always a big thing when you speak about cameras and these things. I do find for what you're getting from a resolutions point of view, a frame rate, and everything else in the camera, I do find the Canon R5 Mark II is probably the best buck for what you're getting in a camera out there in the market at the moment. Another good option, if the R5 Mark II is out of your price range, from a Canon point of view, I'd look at the R6 Mark II. A little bit less resolutions, but also great frame rate and great image quality in the camera as well. Alright, so that's my little review on the Canon R5 Mark II. Like I said, I've had the camera for a couple of months, so still sort of playing around with it, still testing a few things. But so far, I absolutely love it. It's got all the resolutions I want in the camera, the video capabilities, amazing autofocusing system, and like the small little differences like adding pre-capture in there has made a massive difference. I absolutely loved it, and it's brought back that excitement to photograph wildlife for me again. That's it from me for this particular episode of this review. If you have any questions, please give me a shout. You can get in touch with me on Instagram, Johan Van Zyl Photography, or send me an email, johan@wildeye.com. If you have any questions or if you have any comments, I'd look forward to hearing from you. Cheers for now. Thank you for watching.